Serious. What is the most disturbing or creepy thing that you've ever witnessed in real life? Story 1. I was about 12 years old at the time, and I was walking home from a friend's house one evening. It was already dark outside, and as I walked, I passed a small alleyway between two buildings. I noticed a man standing at the end of the alley. He was just standing there, staring at me. I remember feeling a sense of unease, but I tried to ignore it and kept walking. As I got closer to the man, he suddenly stepped out of the alley and started walking towards me. I quickened my pace, but so did he. I started to panic and looked around for help, but there was nobody else on the street. I realized that I was alone with this man, and he was getting closer and closer. Just as I thought he was going to grab me, a car drove by and the headlights illuminated the area. The man immediately turned and ran back into the alleyway. I continued walking, but I couldn't shake the feeling of fear and vulnerability. I'll never forget that moment, and it still gives me chills to this day. Story 2. The most disturbing thing I've ever witnessed happened a few years ago when I was walking home from work. It was dark and quiet, and I was alone. As I turned a corner, I saw a man lying on the ground, surrounded by a small group of people. At first, I thought he was just drunk or passed out, but as I got closer, I realized something was very wrong. He was bleeding heavily from his head, and his eyes were closed. The people around him were calling for an ambulance and trying to keep him awake. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there frozen, watching in horror as this man fought for his life. It felt like an eternity before the ambulance arrived, and by that time, the man had stopped moving. Later, I found out that the man had been attacked by a group of teenagers who had been out looking for trouble. They had hit him over the head with a metal bar and left him for dead. He was in a coma for weeks, and it was touch and go whether he would survive. Story 3. I was walking home late at night and saw a man standing completely still on the sidewalk, staring up at the sky. He didn't move or respond to anything, just stood there with his arms at his sides and his head tilted upwards. At first I thought he might be stargazing or trying to spot something in the sky, but as I got closer, I saw that his eyes were completely glazed over and unfocused. It was as if he was in a trance or under some kind of hypnosis. I was completely unnerved by the sight and quickly crossed the street to avoid getting too close to him. I still have no idea what was going on with that man or what kind of state he was in. Story 4. I was hiking in a forest and stumbled upon a group of vultures feasting on a dead deer. The sight was gruesome enough, but what made it even more unsettling was the complete silence that enveloped the area. Normally, the forest would be filled with the sounds of birds and other animals, but in this spot everything was eerily quiet except for the occasional sound of the vultures tearing into the carcass. It felt like I had stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to see, and I quickly made my way out of there. The experience stayed with me for a while. Story 5. I was waiting for the bus. It was late at night, and I was the only one at the bus stop. Across the street, I noticed a man and a woman walking towards me. At first, I thought they were just a couple walking home, but as they got closer, I could see that something was off. The woman was clearly distressed and kept trying to pull away from the man. He had his arm around her neck and was holding her tightly. She was crying and begging him to let her go, but he wouldn't listen. As they got closer to the bus stop, I could see that he had a knife in his other hand. I was frozen with fear and didn't know what to do. I couldn't just walk away and pretend I hadn't seen anything, but I also didn't want to get involved and risk getting hurt. The man noticed me and started walking towards me, still holding the woman with one hand and the knife in the other. As he got closer, I could see the crazed look in his eyes, and I knew I had to do something. I pulled out my phone and pretended to make a call to the police. I spoke loudly and said that I was at the bus stop and that there was a man with a knife who was assaulting a woman. Thankfully, the man got scared and took off running. The woman was still crying and shaking, but she was safe. I stayed with her until the police arrived and gave my statement. It was one of the scariest things I've ever witnessed. Story 6. I was walking home from work late at night. As I was passing by an abandoned house, I saw a figure standing at a window, staring directly at me. The figure was completely still and didn't move at all. even when I stopped and stared back. As I continued walking, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. When I turned around, I saw the same figure standing at the next window, watching me again. It was a dark, shadowy figure with no distinguishable features, and it sent chills down my spine. I tried to quicken my pace, but the figure kept appearing at each window as I passed by. I could feel its eyes on me, following my every move. When I finally reached my home, I looked back and saw the figure standing outside the abandoned house staring directly at me. To this day, I still have no idea what that figure was or why it was following me. It was definitely the creepiest and most unsettling experience of my life. Story 7. I was on a late-night walk through my quiet neighborhood. As I turned a corner, I saw a figure in the distance that appeared to be dragging something large and heavy across the pavement. I couldn't make out any details at first, but as I got closer, I could see that it was a person dragging a body. I froze in terror, unsure of what to do. The person dragging the body didn't seem to notice me, so I quietly backed away and ran back to my house to call the police. When they arrived, I led them back to the spot where I had seen the figure, but there was no one there. The police searched the area but found nothing. I was left with the unsettling feeling that I had seen something truly disturbing, but with no evidence to prove it. It still haunts me to this day, and I often wonder what would have happened if I had gotten closer or if the figure had noticed me. Story 8. I was deep in the forest, surrounded by dense trees and undergrowth, when suddenly everything went completely silent. There were no birds chirping, no rustling of leaves, no sounds of any kind. It was as if the entire forest had gone dead. At first, I thought maybe I had just gone deaf, but then I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, and it felt like the silence was alive with some kind of malevolent energy. I quickly gathered my things and started to make my way back to the trail, but as I walked, I heard a low, guttural growl coming from somewhere in the woods. It was unlike any sound I had ever heard before, and it filled me with a primal fear that I couldn't explain. I ran as fast as I could, not daring to look back, and eventually made it back to my car. I still don't know what caused the sudden silence in the woods or what made that terrifying rolling noise. Story 9. I was walking home alone one night. It was a quiet, peaceful night, and I was enjoying the cool breeze and the stars in the sky. However, as I was walking, I suddenly heard a loud, piercing scream coming from a nearby alleyway. I immediately froze in fear, unsure of what to do next. The scream was bone-chilling and seemed to last forever. I could hear the terror and agony in the person's voice, and it shook me to my core. I could also hear shuffling and rustling noises, as if someone was struggling or fighting for their life. I wanted to run away, but I was also compelled to investigate and help in any way that I could. So, with trembling legs, I slowly walked towards the alleyway. As I got closer, the screaming stopped abruptly, and there was dead silence. I peeked into the alleyway, but I couldn't see anything. It was pitch black, and the only sound I could hear was my own racing heartbeat. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no response. I quickly walked away from the alleyway, feeling a sense of dread and unease wash over me. I never found out what had happened that night, but the memory still haunts me to this day. The scream was so raw and intense that I can still hear it vividly in my mind. Let me know your stories in the comments to be part of a future video. Like and subscribe to be notified of new uploads, and click on this video to hear more stories.